Clive is launching a new ad campaign. Luckily, his company uses Slack, so there's a channel he can dedicate to his project. There, he can easily collaborate with agencies to execute fast. Channels in Slack, where work happens.
Tough intervention. I mean, that language, and there was more that you used to address Sheryl Sandberg, who is essentially the face and the PR face, the policy face of Facebook, means that something very bad is going on as far as you're concerned.
Absolutely, Christiane. And I think that a tough intervention was absolutely called for in this regard for two reasons. One, George Soros not only had nothing to do with the funding of groups that were using their First Amendment rights to ask legitimate questions about Facebook, but we have seen a pattern that's been used and abused by the right wing in the U.S. and around the globe to distort the good work of George Soros and our foundation, to make a caricature of our work on human rights, and to use it to distort democratic outcomes. But it was important to have a really strong response here because Facebook is one of the most powerful entities that exists on the earth today. You earlier were interviewing a gentleman who talked about Myanmar. Myanmar is a place where the military used Facebook over the course of 5 years to spread a virulent campaign of hate against the Rohingya population that led to a genocide and the mass evacuation of over 700,000 Rohingya from that country. We saw in the Ukraine, the Russian government used, again, distortions on Facebook to manipulate outcomes in the Ukraine as well. We've seen it in the U.S. elections, of course, where Russian interference, again, on Facebook distorted outcomes in democratic practice. So we had to raise objections, not just for George Soros, not just for the Open Society Foundation and for civil society, but because of the threat that exists as a consequence of social media platforms that are under-regulated in the U.S. and elsewhere.
Okay, there's obviously a major growing movement from yourself, from George Soros, from even Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, and others, to call for government regulation in terms of privacy and other such things on all these social media giants, Facebook included. But I want to just get back to the issue at hand, just on this particular issue. Now, Facebook apparently hired the Republican opposition research firm called Definers, and that was the firm that targeted George Soros with what you all call a propaganda campaign. Now, I just read a quote where you said that Facebook, by doing this kind of thing, is undermining our very democracy, that which underpins our democracy. And again, this is incredibly important because Facebook has always claimed to be the force for good, to be the networker, to be the sort of the democracy energizer bunny, if you like. And you said that, what it's doing is promoting these distortions which are beyond the pale. So you had a conversation with Sheryl Sandberg. How did it go? Did she reassure you that this time they understand that it's beyond the pale?
I appreciate that Sheryl Sandberg responded immediately to my letter. I appreciate that Mark Zuckerberg in his press conference expressed some admiration for George Soros, but you can't, in one instance, express some contrition and then immediately move to a space of contest with your critics. Sheryl Sandberg told me that they were firing that group, and they did so, but without any admission of wrongdoing. She also took up my question about whether or not Facebook would support an independent investigation and review of this black ops, false flag operation that they funded. She said that they would take that into consideration, and I appreciate that. But I also appreciate the fact that the new incoming majority in the House of Representatives is asking some very tough questions. Some procedures have already been filed with the Federal Trade Commission. And the issue of monopolistic control of the internet is surfacing in a way in our political discussions that I think brings some much needed interrogation to the issue.
Well, boy, oh boy, you are laying down the gauntlet there. I mean, you're talking about, congressional oversight and accountability potentially happening. The question here is, you said that they have fired Definers, but they told you, and they've said publicly, both Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg, that they had no idea Definers had even been hired. Does that sound credible to you?
Well, Well, I understand that it's a large company, but I find it hard to believe that one would go after someone like George Soros, who, as you said, is a figure of some note, a figure who recently received a pipe bomb in his mailbox as a consequence of these kinds of virulent, hate-filled campaigns. It's difficult to imagine that a firm would make a decision to go after George Soros and our foundation without some clearance at the highest levels of the organization. The first four words of Facebook's mission declaration is give people the power. There was a sense at some point that Facebook and other social internet platforms would be a decentralizing power in our democracies that would lift up citizen voice. But instead, we're seeing a centralization in a way that threatens freedom, that threatens expression, and threatens, at the end of the day, our ability to have the kind of citizen solidarity and cooperation that's necessary for a vital and healthy democracy. So we are going to continue to ask these questions, Christian, and hold Facebook and social media writ large accountable, not just for this, but for the instances that I've already cited, like the atrocities that occurred in Myanmar, where criticism was raised, warnings were lifted up, but action was not taken.
And we're going to bring that up, obviously, with the president and CEO of Reuters in a second. But I just want to go back to Sheryl Sandberg, who said in a Facebook post, "I have great respect for George Soros, and the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories against him are abhorrent." But George Soros started bringing up the power of this social media giant a long time ago, including about a year ago at Davos, when he said the following. So let's just play this, and then we're going to talk about Soros.
They claim that they are merely distributing information, but the fact that they are near monopoly distributors make them into public utilities and should subject them to more stringent regulations aimed at preserving competition, innovation, and fair and open universal access.
So we talked a little bit about that. He does want them, and he wants a level playing field. But let's just ask you to now sort of, how is it that somebody like George Soros can be used and attacked with all these anti-Semitic tropes, with the notion even that the president of the United States alluded to potentially he was, funding this migrant caravan all the way from Central America to the southern border, which actually hasn't even materialized. Others have said that he was paying for the women who confronted Senator Flake in the elevator, during the Kavanaugh hearings. I mean, how does that even develop in a country like the United States?
That's a great question, Christian. And I would tell you that there was a time when I would have laughed at those kinds of accusations, but that was a moment before George Soros received a pipe bomb by someone who clearly was incentivized by that kind of weaponized distortion and language. George Soros is a philanthropist who, since 1984, has used resources that he earned in the free and open markets to first contribute to democratization in the former Soviet Union, and to then take up the plight of South Africans during the height of apartheid, and then, as a consequence of lessons learned through that philanthropy, made a decision that he was going to seed the Open Society foundations to help build robust institutions of democracy throughout the world and to stand up vibrant civil society. So he's been doing that work for over 2 decades now, and the criticism that you heard him lift up about Facebook in those remarks is in keeping with that philanthropy. There are authoritarians like the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, who have used George Soros as a convenient scapegoat when they feel threatened by their civil societies who are asking important questions about corruption and transparency and the integrity of elections and academic freedom. I'm here in Europe right now, Christian, in Brussels. I just came from the European Union, which not that long ago moved articles against Viktor Orban and Hungary for the repression of rights. So it's only natural that the Viktor Orbáns of this world, and regrettably now, apparently the President of the United States, would use old tropes of puppet mastery, anti-Semitic tropes against someone like George to distract and deflect against some of the most repressive acts that we've seen in the 21st century.
And again, I just want you to come back full circle, because it all depends on how the CEO of this massive giant that has billions of users, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, can actually get control of his own company, because they keep saying they don't know that this is happening and they will investigate it. So I would like to play for you a soundbite from Zuckerberg, which was all the way back about the Russian stuff. And let's see what you think afterwards.
What we see are a lot of folks trying to sow division, right? So that was a major tactic that we saw Russia try to use in the 2016 election. Actually, most of what they did was not directly, as far as we can tell from the data that we've seen, was not directly about the election, but was more about just dividing people. What I can commit to is that we're going to make it as hard as possible for these adversaries to do that, and I think that we're going to do a much better job.
Okay, so, that was a long time ago. I think we're going to do a much better job. I've got very little time left, but how much faith do you have in that pledge?
We need more than words now. We need action. We've heard from Facebook time and time again that they're going to do a better job, and then we end up in these kinds of circumstances. So we need independent review of what just occurred in Facebook. We need Congress in the U.S. to play the kind of regulatory role that the EU is playing much more assertively in Europe, and we need Facebook users to have the opportunity to manage and own their own data and to have a degree of privacy that is not afforded to them today. Facebook can be an important democratizing tool. We've seen that, and we need them to live up to that potential and that promise.
And it affects everybody.